we present the NEA Foundation's Award for Outstanding Service to Public Education to our youngest recipient ever, Adora Spitak.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I'd just like to thank the NEA Foundation for this incredible honor. I'm humbled to join a recipient list that includes so many people whom I have looked up to for years. And when I say years, I mean from very early on, because I watched Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street and Reading Rainbow on my family's TV, and I read about Billie Jean King and Bill Clinton in history books. Though, oh, no. In textbooks. I mean, it's not a bad thing to be in. Though I may stand significantly shorter than these amazing people before me who have accepted this award, someday I hope to have a list of accomplishments just as long. Fittingly, I think that perhaps none of these awards for outstanding service to public education would have been possible if not for the outstanding educations the awardees themselves have received. Take my story as a case in point. 10 years ago, if you by some strange coincidence happened to be walking past a neighborhood park in the Highlands area of Renton, Washington State, you would have seen a gregarious 3-year-old. I hear some clapping. Oh wow, there's people who actually know where that is. You would have seen a 3-year-old curiously standing on top of this big flat rock in the middle of the park, speechifying, and yes, that is a word, on topics ranging from education to the environment to a newly announced presidential candidacy. That 3-year-old was me. Though I still hold many of the same interests, with the possible exception of running for president, it is striking to see, possible, you never know, it's striking to see how much else has changed. Even me, looking back on that 3-year-old, it's kind of incredible. I've gone from that 3-year-old with a park for a venue, a rock for a stage, and mom and big sister for an audience, to a 13-year-old accepting the NEA Foundation's Award for Outstanding Service to Public Education. A lot has changed in 10 years. I would truly like to thank my parents who are sitting over there at table 7 for supporting me. And I wanted to, through this speech, just share with you my own story and the people who have made it possible for me to come this far. My story is possible because of 21st century technology, because of connections that I made with educators who believed in me, and because of what I've learned from others, whether young or old. After I published my first book at the age of 7, I began presenting at schools, as you heard, nationally and internationally. And I did this whenever I could, but it often translated to just maybe a couple times every few months or so. And it was frustrating to me that I couldn't just hop on a plane and go to whatever school wanted me to come and speak. Because if you think about it, you know, a 7-year-old just walking into the airport and catching a flight is not the most feasible thing to do. And this was incredibly frustrating. It was a school in Texas that actually suggested to me, oh, why don't you try something like video conferencing? And this medium opened up a literal world of possibilities, because soon I was delivering lessons on writing, leadership, and social studies to audiences and places as diverse as Camden, New Jersey to Costa Rica, Tennessee to Quebec. So far, I've spoken to over 400 schools and classrooms, and my mom was always there to record the lessons and put them online, where I now have over 1,000 of them free for learners everywhere. But those numbers, I think, that's a pretty large amount of numbers, but it's not these numbers, significant as they may be, of videos uploaded or classrooms reached, that truly makes me happy. Because I can get the same satisfaction, and I know many of the educators in the audience probably know what I'm talking about, I can get the same satisfaction from helping one struggling student as I can from speaking to a room of 100 if I'm able to connect with the students. And these are truly the times that I remember best. One time I was having one of my video conferences with an elementary class, and as you know is sometimes bound to happen, there was a technical issue, and they couldn't hear or see me for some reason, but I could still hear and see them for a couple seconds. I think the connection had timed out. And so the teacher had the students file out of the room, but as they left, I could see their faces and they were very sad, and they said, "Oh, don't go, come back." And it was just incredibly touching to me to see these kids who had been touched, who wanted me to stay on screen. Another time I received this giant package in the mail, and I opened it wondering what it was, and I saw that it was all these handwritten letters that the students had sent me about what they'd learned in the video conference. Most recently, I received an email from an elementary school teacher in California. This is a part of what she wrote. "Adora, I have a student that adores you. She's a hardworking 7-year-old that is looking for inspiration. When she began to grieve, I wasn't able to really get her to write until I told her about you and showed her your website. During the day sometimes she'll bring you up and it'll be her motivation to write for that day. I can't thank this teacher enough for passing this on, because it made my day to see how someone else's life has been touched, how they've been affected by a connection, by something that I did. Indeed, though video and internet technologies have made much of what I've done possible, some of the things which make good classrooms, as you know, aren't necessarily things which are new or technological at all. They have to do with tools that have been around as long as the profession of teaching. When you think back to the best educators that you knew through your own school experience, you want to think what made them so effective. Did you feel that they made a personal connection with you? Did you feel like they knew you and cared about your learning? It's this personal connection that we must strive for in education. Because learning is about connecting facts and ideas and places, but also connecting people. When you ask yourself, what is the purpose of my role as an educator? You probably have a few different answers. I administrate my school, oversee projects, lead changes, take care of discipline. These are all crucial things, but probably one of the most important things you do is form personal connections with your students. Think back to your best teachers. And I ask you one question, were they the ones who read line by line out of the textbook every day? Probably not. Your best teachers likely weren't the ones who were automated systems. They were the ones who took personal interest in your learning. I've been lucky enough to have one of those teachers. Mrs. Vindovich is here. I'm so lucky to have her here today. Could you please stand up? Thank you. And Mrs. V is such a great example of teachers who took a personal interest in my learning. She was eager to hear when and where I'd be speaking next. She watched the videos I post online, even ordered several copies of my books, and being a patron of the arts, right? And she even passed along her favorite, one of her favorite books, Why by Nikolai Popov, which has become one of my favorites too. I still have it, and it's a beautiful book. Yet my online classmates and I didn't walk into a physical classroom and see her face to face every day. You see, I attend the Washington Virtual Academy, which is an online public school. So Mrs. V made connections with us through phone calls, emails, monthly in-person field trips, and even a weekly game of History Jeopardy, my favorite. These may sound like small things, but they motivated me in the learning process. Both at home and over the course of my travels, I've been lucky to meet so many incredible educators who represent this connecting with students. I was at a conference in Florida where I met Carol Williams, a math teacher from Georgia, and she told me so enthusiastically about her students who had been so sad to see her leave for the conference that they texted her every day asking her to come back. And even though she taught middle school, many of her successful students still kept in touch through high school and college. Today, we've seen these videos about these teachers who get their students involved, who bring their students on trips, who are truly emblematic of this quality of connection. I'm lucky to have met many incredible educators, yet many of them would say that they're not the only teachers in the classroom. We sometimes think that only grown-ups teach and only students or children learn. I'd like to change that idea of education being a one-way street. Because when you think about it, you can learn a lot from young people. I challenge all of you to say that you've never, ever learned anything from a young person or a student. And after all, the best relationships are reciprocal. In business or government, friendship or education, you may have found that listening to others works. You can learn a lot from these seemingly unconventional education partnerships, learning from those who are younger than you are. What is it exactly that you can learn from your students, you might ask? From many younger students, it might be that almost naive belief in possibility, positive thinking versus negative, or the creativity you see in a 5-year-old's crayon drawings. Admittedly, I lean towards being pessimistic sometimes, and so some of you in the audience might ask, well, optimism is great, but what about serious, everyday issues? Youth can provide insightful perspectives here as well. Last September, I organized a conference, TEDx Redmond, and all of my planning committee, all the speakers, all the attendees, kids under 18. In the education section, we dealt with tough issues. Speakers talked about the urgent need for creativity in school, talked about school budget cuts and how teacher layoffs had affected them, as well as even cafeteria food. And decisions on all these education-related issues had been made without student input. This is something we can change. By speaking at TEDx Redmond, students had a voice, and educators listened. I ask all of you to consider the NEA Foundation's own values, available readily at their website, of participation, partnership, and democracy when it comes to learning from students. There's a riddle where a boy's hospitalized and is seen by a doctor who says, "This is my son," but his dad isn't at the hospital. So how is this possible? Well, what this riddle does is play on cultural perceptions of doctors always being men and the doctor's really his mother. What is the average age of the person you think of when you hear teacher? Probably an adult. I want you to change that image. Why does the teacher always have to be an adult? Everyone has something to learn, and everyone has something to teach. Teaching and learning. I found over the course of my speaking and learning from those older and younger that teaching and learning is truly a two-way street. But unlike on the real street, there's no driver's age requirement. To the educators in the audience, I commend you for your hard work and dedication in teaching our next generation of leaders. I encourage each one of you, whether you're a parent, a student, or an educator, to think about what you each can learn from the other. Because I firmly believe that it is only when we know how to learn that we truly know how to teach. Thank you.